I think the size of the audience here makes it clear that Bill Finnegan really needs no introduction in Berkeley among people who read The New Yorker and some of his fine books. He's been a contributor to The New Yorker since 1984 and a staff writer since 1987. He's reported from Africa, Central America, South America, Europe, the Balkans, and Australia, as well as from the United States. And he's served in those places and more, as you'll see. He's won a slew of awards in his distinguished career. He's also written a number of books, including the most recent Barbarian Days, A Surfing Life, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2016. Please welcome Bill Finnegan. Well, let me start off. We talked on the phone the other day, and the overriding question I had from reading this book was how vivid your recollection of your youth is. Now, most people who came of age during that time, for various reasons, don't quite remember quite such detail. So I have to ask you, Bill, did you keep a journal during that time, or do you have some kind of superpower memories? I mean, just amazing the descriptions of not only anecdotes with your friends and parties you went to, but also of the waves, just the intricate detail of these waves. How'd you do it?
I don't know.
I was hoping for some tips.
But thank you all very, very much for coming out on this beautiful afternoon. I don't have a super memory at all. I have increasingly, I think, a kind of crummy memory. But for this memoir, I did keep really good journals from a certain age, maybe mid-teens, for the next maybe 20 years. I mean, really extensive journals. I shouldn't say good, because they're full of just sort of self-castigation, lots of introspection, miseries over girls. I mean, stuff that wasn't that useful when I came to write this. And but I also wrote a ton of letters, and I luckily got some of those returned, and they were a real. In fact, I was kind of struggling to start this book. I'd committed to doing it, but couldn't really see how to do it. And about 10 years ago, a package came out of the blue in my mailbox, and it was a bundle of letters that I had written in the mid-'60s to my best friend. My family had moved to Hawaii. My dad got a job there. I grew up in Southern California. And I just wrote to my best friend back in California about, Hawaii and my school, and especially the surf. I've been surfing for a few years. I was 13 when we moved there. And so it was incredibly exciting, and just my life there. And here was dozens and dozens of letters written when I was 13 and 14, hundreds of pages. And his mother had kept them for 40 years in the garage, and he didn't know I was thinking about this. And so it was really they're incredibly embarrassing, ridiculous. The writing is terrible, and it was revealing in all kinds of awkward and painful ways. But it was such a, sort of Proustian Madeleine, just bit into the detail was so, and that I thought, this is the first chapter of this book I'm trying to conceive. And on many levels, it just was. And that, in fact, those letters form the backbone of chapter 1 of this book, which is about that era in Honolulu.
You refer to a number of the letters throughout the book, and which made me think, whether you had a Xerox machine or how you kept copy of them. I fear for the younger generation, though, with Snapchat, that they're 20 years from now, they're not going to be able to go back and recreate their youth. Tell me about, you have a lot of tales of your friends. I would not say they are necessarily unflattering at times, but maybe things that people don't necessarily want to dredge up as they've moved on into adulthood. Right. How were you able to persuade, particularly some of your childhood friends, to be a character, if you will, in this book?
Yeah, that's a central question to memoir, of course, and it's especially weird genre for a reporter, because you basically go investigate your own memories, kind of report out your past. And as you suggest, you're not the only interested party, right? This is private life we're talking about, and nothing was on the record, and so giving yourself license to depict all these shared, unguarded moments with friends and loved ones, usually many years later, it's a huge arrogation, and you have to think long and hard about what to put in and what to leave out, and I contacted a lot of old friends and frenemies, and just sort of people I could find to go over what I remembered, what they remembered, how they felt about me writing about it, and some of it was fairly fraught, and then others. I mean, there were all these surprises. I mean, people that I really didn't want to talk to or go over things with. British publishers, they have stricter libel laws in Britain, and they really wanted me to go back and did you check this with her and that one, and like they wanted me to basically get liability waivers from people, it felt like. And so I went looking for some people that I really didn't want to talk to. For instance, a woman here in California whose life I described as one long middle-aged orgy, and I just thought so I went to her and I told her, and she said, "You wrote that? You put that in your book? That's great." And she was just, she's like 89 now, and she, wants to be remembered that way. And then other people were, appalled by these like episodes I thought were perfectly reputable that I might put them in the book. So there's lots of negotiation around all that.
Are there things that you had to leave out or take out?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, a fair amount that I could just on my own think, no, this is, this is between us and the rest of the world doesn't need to know about this. But plenty of negotiations that end up with, well, okay, can I use this but not that? And actually a couple of the main characters in the book, like great friends, my first girlfriend, this guy I traveled around the world with and surfing in our youths, both of them, I ended up in desperation saying, can I look at your journal, from Samoa or from, some period I'm struggling to recount. And both of them showed me their journals, small parts of them heavily redacted. I mean, just what is under? Both of them did this exact same thing, and they don't even know each other. And I figured it's all like stuff about me underneath there. But anyway, and their journals were fantastic, much better than mine. I mean, I would have kept journals like that if I'd known I was going to write a book. I mean, my friend Brian would go into a shop in Samoa and write down everything that's on the shelves in the shop. And it's just such a luminous list, I mean, weird little radios from Red China and everything that I should have been recording and instead was writing about my heartaches. And so.
Well, let's talk about surfing. Bill, as I read your descriptions of surfing, I see it sort of described as, and this is my takeaway, part art, part science, but very much spiritual. Let me just read one of the passages that really struck me in your description of surfing as a spiritual endeavor. Everything out there was disturbingly interlaced with everything else. Waves were the playing field. They were the goal. They were the object of your deepest desire and adoration. At the same time, they were your adversary, your nemesis, even your mortal enemy. The surf was your refuge, your happy hiding place, but it was also a hostile wilderness, a dynamic, indifferent world. At 13, I had mostly stopped believing in God, but that was a new development, and it had left a hole in the world, a feeling that I'd been abandoned. The ocean was like an uncaring God, endlessly dangerous, power beyond measure. Isn't that beautiful writing?
Thanks.
Tell me, was it a spiritual experience to be out there on the water?
Well, I mean, surfing is something I've been doing for 50-odd years, and it's normally very sort of every day, sort of work a day. I live in New York now, but I surf quite a bit around there, especially in the wintertime. It gets pretty good, and there are great days and ordinary days and frustrating days but in the kind of and they're sort of transcendent days that you almost I guess I wrote about some of them, but it's almost like you don't want to talk about them afterward. You don't. Maybe you share them with somebody, and there's just you don't say much because it's so what you shared is so intense and so kind of outside the world, and yet I mean that passage you read comes from that very first chapter, and when I was 13, 14 in Honolulu, and yeah, I was raised Catholic and confirmed, and then given a choice about whether to continue going to Mass, and I stopped, and sort of looking at that period of my life, I can see clearly now what I wouldn't have seen really then. I would have just noticed that like all my rest of my family went off to Mass in the morning, and I got to go surf on Sundays. That's about how I would have put it. But I mean, looking back and seeing the pattern of my life and where my sort of belief went, where kind of deepest feelings went, and where I sort of reckoned with large questions, it was in the water, and I wouldn't have been able to talk about it then, but I can now. And so the simple answer to your question is yes, but it's not a sort of conscious or constant or in any way kind of solemn thing in my practice, say, of surfing. And with, I mean, the guys I surf with in New York are, incredibly foul-mouthed and sarcastic about everything, and nobody's the least bit what you'd think of as reverential, except at those points when you have no other choice. It's the ocean achieves a state, and you achieve a state in it that kind of silences you, and then nobody's sarcastic, but usually not much is said about it afterward. So it's a funny. As I say, the simple answer is yes, but it doesn't necessarily look that way.
You make a number of references to the book, and including your comments here about how that you were a very active writer in your youth, albeit an unpublished one. What drew you to writing?
I don't know. I did start writing really young. I wrote a lot. Had a sort of ongoing battle with my father, who would see me always, writing, and letters, for instance, but also just short stories and eventually 3 big unpublished novels. But even when I was a kid, he was after me to kind of write with some discipline, write for the local newspaper. You got to have deadlines. You got to publish, and that's what he'd done. He was a journalist in his youth, and I was just afraid of rejection, I suppose, and just didn't want to engage. I just wanted to write this stuff and have it somehow, end up in books, but I didn't know about the process between here and there. And that went on for years. I mean, as I said, I wrote 3 novels, and it was only in the 3rd novel that I was actually trying to find out what an agent was and all that good stuff. I had a big compulsion. I mean, the first novel was driven by heartbreak, and I just had to try to make sense of what had happened, and so I went and hid out in Norway, of all places, and wrote this 1,000-page novel, and that 2 people ever read, or they said they read. I doubt they really got through it. So.
Yeah, you did mention that in the book a number of times about your father pushing you to go into journalism, which may be one of the last generations where people actually want their kids to go to this crazy profession.
Well, he was a frustrated journalist. He was I noticed on my birth certificate it says he was a news writer at CBS. Well, by the time I was aware of things, he worked in film and TV production, and so he was a frustrated writer, and he was kind of projecting that onto me.
And let the record show, your mother, on the other hand, wanted you to become one of Nader's raiders and become a crusading attorney against the corporations and other evildoers in society. Did you ever give any thought to that?
Not specifically, but I felt the onus always, am I yet living up to my mom's expectations? And there was a moment when I was living in South Africa. It was toward the end of my many years as a surf bum, and the last day job I had during that long trip, that long period, was my late 20s. I was teaching high school near Cape Town, and it was in the bad old days of apartheid, early 80s, and very intense situation. and my parents surprised me. They turned up. I hadn't seen them in 3 years, and they just turned up to visit me. They were fed up with my, hardly hearing from me and me being gone for years, and there I was, bringing light to as a black high school. It was like these black kids in Africa, and it was all very embarrassing because by that point I realized that I wasn't doing much good there. In fact, it was all kind of going backwards in my head. Stuff I thought was good turned out to be very politically troublesome, but I had the ironic kind of blessing of my mother at that point. It's not, you're not a Nader's Raider, but you're doing okay. It looks a little bit like the Peace Corps sort of thing.
Your concern, if I recall from the book, was you felt like it was the programs that you were working with instilled a lot of false hope in students who really had
that's right.
no chance in apartheid South Africa.
Yeah, it was very politically complicated. I just, I was there with this kind of American attitude, and these kids were highly politicized, but they kind of hid that from me for quite a while, and then suddenly they went out on strike against apartheid in education. The syllabus was impossible to teach. It was this apartheid syllabus, and it was very complex. And with my seniors, was high school, I had this careers program going, and I was trying to help kids get into college here and there around the country, and there were these programs available. They were all being boycotted also, but everybody was too polite to tell me, we cannot possibly apply for these permits or whatever it was. And so I worked, and everybody got really into it, and it was a real white man's folly.
You mentioned that you would write, but you'd be sort of afraid or had insecurity about putting it out there. How'd you overcome that? And have you completely overcome it? I mean, some writers still don't know. I mean, I imagine at the New Yorker, it's quite a process once you've finished to think you've finished till publication. But do you still feel at this point that you're waiting to see what the reaction is?
Yeah. I remember being very surprised at some point when I was freelancing. Lived in San Francisco, freelancing before I moved to New York and joined the New Yorker. And somebody, John Updike or somebody, writing about like the terror of handing in your little book review or whatever it was in his case. And I thought, John Updike, give me a break. There's no way he's shaking in fear as he, hands things in. But I would no longer say that. Because I've been at this a long time, and most of the stuff I write makes it into print, and yet it feels like, for me anyway, it feels like starting over every time. And there is that sort of trembly, I haven't heard back, I guess it was no good, that whole thing. But how I sort of went from non-publishing to publishing, it was gradual. I was sort of freelancing and started selling some stuff to travel magazines, and then that year in South Africa, that year teaching, I actually stayed there 2 years, really was so politically intense that by the time it was over, I had lost interest in the kind of fiction I'd been writing and just wanted to do political journalism. And it seemed, my kind of nervousness about stuff seemed unimportant compared to the kind of urgency of the issues. Although weirdly, I didn't write about South Africa right away. That's the whole other story. I was sort of caught up in the militancy of the moment and thought, I can't entertain these Americans with the suffering of people here. I'm not gonna do it. And of course, I had no other subject. I had nothing else to write about. So it took me a while to compromise and start writing about South Africa. But it was a sense of like, this is actually important, that helped me get over some of my stage fright.
Well, Bill, nothing piques the interest of a journalist like something that they cannot see. So when you made those glancing references to the 1,000-page novel that you wrote after a breakup with a girlfriend, never published, what are we missing?
Oh, you're missing nothing. I can't imagine.
1,000 pages?
It's in a box somewhere. God. I was heavily under the influence of James Joyce and other, masters of obscurity. So I hate to think.
I guess we're not going to get much out of him.
I haven't reread it. I don't even know where it is.
Well, maybe we'll just have to wait for the movie, Bill.
Yeah.
Now, you grew up in what seemed like a relatively comfortable middle-class existence, yet it seems like when you weren't surfing, you were fighting. How did it come out? As you put it, there's a lot of violence in your youth, a lot of fistfights, and as you note in your book, this wasn't at a time where you had violent video games we could blame or whatever. What was that all about?
Well, most of it, I mentioned that this book starts in Honolulu, and I went to a public junior high called an intermediate, Kamiki Intermediate School, which is quite rough. It was really ganged up and really racialized, and I didn't have a gang, and I didn't have any friends, and so I was constantly in fights, and not by my choosing. And so that might kind of give you that impression that is a misimpression of my life. I eventually was invited to join a little white gang. It had the incredible name, the In Crowd. That's what they call themselves. Would you like to join? And so I happily joined, and they had my back, and that was sort of the end of my fighting career. But because suddenly it was like big gangs, and nothing really happened. There was a lot of peace talks and threats, and nothing ever really happened. But I did, there's a sort of meditation on sort of mid-century child violence and how different it is now. And there was lots of like I had boxing gloves. My friends had boxing gloves, and we'd sort of stand out in the street and just wail on each other, And adults would walk by, nobody ever say anything. I don't notice anybody doing that these days, and so I had occasion to and parents whacking their kids. I'm sure you're all old enough to remember these things in public and everywhere else, and then it was changing. So I was sort of reflecting on some of the social changes.
Well, the book is certainly a testament to the culture of surfing at a particular moment in time, but there's really no escaping the backdrop. This was a lot of it was in the 60s with the counterculture movement. And I have to say, Bill, when I think of California surfing, I think of kind of an escapism from society, whereas when I think of the counterculture movement, I think of this period of in-your-face confrontation with the mores of society in every way, politics, social justice, gender roles. But at the same time, you kind of blended some of that sensibility into your perception of surfing. Was surfing part of the counterculture movement?
Yeah, it was. Not in the more immediate or militant political parts. There's an environmentalist movement connected to surfing for obvious reasons. And surfers in my youth during the Vietnam War were big draft dodgers, and there was a lot of anti-war feeling among surfers that I knew in California and Hawaii and elsewhere. But in general, and there was a huge kind of this kind of gets into the weeds about surfing, but there was a design revolution, basically 1968, where there was sort of social revolution going on all throughout the West, at least. The Western Europe and the U.S. And in much of the world, and it kind of expressed itself in surfing through this radical change in surfboard design, and then sort of what surfing was and what it was for. Boards had been these great, long, heavy things, now called longboards, at the time just called surfboards, and then suddenly these much, much shorter, much more difficult to ride, but more maneuverable and much faster in the pocket, and they just changed like what you were trying to do basically on a surfboard, and it was virtually overnight, and suddenly your board was worth nothing. You had to get one of these new experimental little things, and it was all caught up in all the social changes going on. These not only were these boards tiny and strange, but they were covered with psychedelic, paint jobs, and everybody was suddenly a hippie, and so surfing was very much caught up in the counterculture in that way, and a lot of surfers became drug dealers, and it was not separate. It wasn't a jock thing at all. In the sort of divisions of the time, the social divisions, when I was in high school, for instance, surfers were over here very much kind of anti-war, anti-establishment, loathed by cops, picked on by cops. We were over here, and I don't know about other people's experience, but my experience of high school in the late 60s was a real culture split down the middle. You sort of couldn't go out for sports as a boy, like football or something, if you were anti-war. The coaches wouldn't have you. It was that strong. I don't know if other people's experience was that or not.
So I guess those Gidget movies kind of missed that counterculture tension, huh?
They were a little earlier, and they missed a lot.
Sounds like it. Well, I want to borrow a question from Surfer Magazine, which interviewed you after you won the Pulitzer for Barbarian Days. Here's their question. I'll take out all the dude. Bill, you've done some serious, hard reporting. Does it feel odd to win a Pulitzer for writing about your own, and this is their words, more or less pedestrian life?
You know, I was walking down a busy street when I got that question. I didn't hear it clearly. More or less, I should have just hung up on him right there. Yeah, it's odd. I mean, I've written 4 other books, all of them much more journalistic and about other people's problems, basically. And I'm mixed up in them to different extents, but they're big journalistic efforts, and this, you could say, oh, this is just like a book about your hobby, like who cares? And it's true, it's selling better than all those serious books, but and it's a little disorienting. I mean, I've with my other books, I've had, like, I did a couple books about South Africa, for instance. I was involved in the anti-apartheid movement in my way, and really had something to say. I'd had to get out there and tell people what I had figured out or experienced, or how I thought things were or should be, and that was true of all of those books. They're political, broadly defined narrative, but with a deeply political base. And yeah, this one, I don't feel any need to evangelize about surfing. In fact, I hope, like a lot of surfers, I dearly hope surfing just becomes uncool, like rollerblading or something, and everybody just gives it up and goes away. There's a crowd problem in surfing. There are too many surfers. So.
Well, let me just assure those who have not read the book yet, his youth is anything but pedestrian. It was really fascinating.
You know what that guy was probably referring to? I mean, I didn't catch that. I believe that's what he said or what they put in print, but I didn't hear it. I don't think, because I would have been insulted. I think I'm a pedestrian right now. Anyway,
I'll tell you, if that's the case, I want to read a book about his life.
Yeah. What do you mean you're walking down the street? Anyway, I think that in surfing, well, I don't know. In the world of surfing, there are people who do spectacular things. I mean, great surfers, which does not include me, pros and such, and guys who ride gigantic waves. And compared to them, I'm just like I noticed the reviews in Australia were funny because over and over, reviewers would say, finally, a book by an ordinary bloke, just somebody just like the rest of us. And what they're referring to a whole, like a shelf of books, which I haven't read, but are, they sell, even our bestsellers in Australia, apparently. And I had interviewers, too, calling me up and saying, so where are the naughty bits? It's from Australia. And I said, what are you talking about, the naughty bits, And it's, every surf book's got to have, like the high, and then the crash, all the cocaine, and the girls, and the, like, naughty, terrible stuff, and then you like redemption. And no, it's not one of those books. And as I say, there's this genre, which are actually like as told to or ghost-written biographies of surf stars who are big, sports heroes in Australia, not like here. People know a lot about surfing and competition and all that, and it's a whole world. And there's a whole lot of books written about the big names in that world. And so they were kind of expecting that. And instead, here's a guy who, just like all of us, these are the reviewers, spend his 20s under a palm tree. It's so great and I just don't think there are that many reviewers who would say, we all spend our 20s under a palm tree, because it's different.
How does writing this book compare with your other work? Did you find it harder or easier? You mentioned in that Surfer Magazine interview that you knew you had a lot of explaining to do to make this book accessible to non-surfers. Did you have somebody to provide you reality check, like, hey, Bill, you're just getting too darn technical here. You lost me at mid-wave.
Yes, yeah, a lot of that. I mean, just said my editor, my wife also, who has zero interest in surfing, got her to read drafts, and it's very much written for general reader, and so in the first couple of chapters, I try to tuck in no glossary or anything, but sort of tuck in all the like oceanographic basis and the various basics I meant to say, and the various terms of art that you will need to know later so that scenes make sense. And as I say, I try to tuck them in so that they go down easily and don't annoy surfers too much as they read. And then later, if you dropped into the middle of this book, I think, and read, it's not tons of surfing scenes, but in the surfing scene, and you didn't know anything about surfing, you'd be a bit lost because there are terms being used now, just without explanation, but were defined earlier. And it was, it's a trick to do that and get people oriented because there is so much technical jargon and just terms that are unique to surfing. And it was really annoying actually sometimes. I mean, my wife would say, I don't understand this. What's a channel? A channel? That's not even a surfing term. A channel, the shipping channel. Come on, And she'd say, I don't know what's going on. And a channel where no waves break, and then just the effort to kind of keep everybody oriented in a surf scene and let them know what's at stake, and so it was slow writing, but fun, more fun than a lot of what I do. And one of the reasons is it took like 15 years or more to write, and partly because it was too fun. I kept feeling like this isn't serious work. I got to get back to work. I can't keep indulging myself. There's because as I said, I write mainly about politics, often about crises of one kind or another, humanitarian crises and conflicts and a lot of international stuff that's really got to be told soon, and this didn't have that, so I'd pick it up and work for a while, then feel like a jerk and put it away, and self-indulgent and back to work. So,
what is your writing pace like? Do you were you working on other intensive, if you will, more serious projects at the same time that you were doing this book, or did you take time off, like, gee, this summer I'm going to work on my book? How did that work?
Yeah, they're separated. When I was deep into this, I'd be just surrounded by all my sort of notes and AIDS memoir, just the charts and stuff that were just this. It's hard. I have trouble working on two projects at once.
Yeah, I would think, and especially with the intensity of some of the work that you do with the New Yorker.
Yeah, some I do long pieces, and sometimes I have a long time, 6 months or a year on a piece, but other times I'll do fast, like 2 weeks in someplace, and my editor called me the other day and said, you got to go to Venezuela, or will you go to Venezuela? Venezuela's kind of blowing up now. People probably know. And I couldn't. I had this to do and other things to do, and said no, but that kind of project, they're very intense, and it's often, like, the reporting's tough, but it's finite, and then the writing is on deadline, and the editing is fast, and the checking is fast, and it hurts, but it's over in 6 weeks, sort of thing. And so I do a fair amount of those, and the writing of this was broken up by many of those and other types of projects.
You certainly, I think, succeeded in making the stories interesting and accessible to the non-surfer. How about the surfing community? How are they receiving your book? Too dumbed down in there? Yes.
This fellow I encountered in the lobby said, I just got out of the water. I just made it. So very important support for me. I don't know. I'm trying to think about what surfers have said. I mean, a fair number of people have said, finally, I can explain my life to my wife, or, I've heard that quite a bit. And alternatively, somebody's saying, finally, I understand my crazy husband, when they read this. So there's some of that. I'm trying to think of good trenchant critiques from surfers, because they're usually pretty good at that. But none are leaping to mind. It's a funny subject, like others, I'm sure, but surfers are attuned to this, that somebody comes in and tries to write about surfing who doesn't surf, it's kind of impossible to get right. I mean, I've never seen it done, not even close. And I've, everybody from Tom Wolfe to Mark Twain and on has come, but it's really hard to understand and get it right somehow, unless you come from it. And I first published a piece back in 1992 about surfing Ocean Beach out here in San Francisco, and a guy I used to surf with there, and a lot of the reaction to it from surfers was unbelievable. This is actually a guy. I mean, it's like I can't get things wrong even if I tried about surfing because I'm inside it. I come from inside it, and so it's like somebody from the tribe went and told everybody else. Was sort of the feeling in the reaction to that. And there was plenty of criticism of that piece, but it wasn't, anything about the surfing. It was because that's where we all sort of live, and so it's there are some surfers who write well, but they tend to write within the surfing world, not for people outside. It's almost like a language, like we're living inside a dialect that's kind of incomprehensible to outsiders, and you either know it or you don't.
I wanted to ask you about Ocean Beach, being the San Francisco journalist, always looking for the local angle here. You describe it as cold, unmapped, frequently unreasonable.
Yeah, it's everybody probably knows Ocean Beach is long, straight, beachfront, and it's surfing is I mean, there's the athletic part, the being able to paddle, catch a wave, jump up, turn, that stuff, which is best learned when you're really young, hard to learn when you're older, but especially on a shorter board. But the main part of surfing, when you just have the basics, is understanding. Is like figuring out what the ocean is doing. Is your judgment and reading the ocean, and that's really what it all is. And if you glance down at Ocean Beach or anywhere else and see a bunch of people in the water, that's what they're doing out there. I mean, it's pretentious to call it the intellectual work of surfing, I suppose, but they're trying to understand. It's like applied oceanography on a very, very small, specific scale. Every bit of current and tide and wind and swell angle and swell size and swell period and every rock, or there's no rocks at Ocean Beach, but places are either complicated or not so complicated, but to get them wired, as we say, to get to understand it is a study of, like a longitudinal study of years to actually begin to understand. That's what everybody out there is doing, is trying to understand what the ocean is doing and is about to do next, to anticipate it. And if it's crowded, to anticipate it better than the other people around you, and to be in the spot. So it's this real, and Ocean Beach is as complicated a problem as I've ever seen. I mean, it's like the equivalent of, I don't know, continental philosophy or something. It is so, there's all these sandbars. It gets a lot of swell out of the northwest all winter, and so it's big and it's really hard to paddle out. It's the hardest place to get from shore to the lineup, as we say, where you want to surf on a bigger day. Of the hardest I've ever seen in my life, and I've surfed all over. And in fact, it was kind of unknown in the 80s. I mean, there was a really small community of people I surfed with there then, and now there's a lot more people who surf it. It became known. Some photos were published that sort of showed how good it can get. And so people started, making pilgrimages there on big swells with good conditions, and pros come and so on now. And it's kind of vindicated. Even all these years later, I still feel good when I'll see a photo or some video of pros riding big, great Ocean Beach, and they'll come in and say, I've never been beaten up that badly in my life. I had to duck dive 50 waves to paddle out. This place is a madhouse. And I just, yes. I mean, all of us who suffered that thing and thought we were really uniquely suffering. You were uniquely suffering. Okay. So that's Ocean Beach. That's what I mean about unreasonable. You look for a channel, right, to get out, and you're up there in the dunes. Okay, I got it. I'm going to line up with that church, that house, that channel. I got it. And you start out, and it's just, you can't find the channel. The currents are carrying you halfway to the Golden Gate, and you just get pounded and pounded. I used to paddle out there on bigger days often. You have a leash, a little leg rope attaching your board to your foot, and I used to just like crawl on the sand. And it's a couple hundred yards out, but just like if I can get 3 feet between waves, get a breath, go down, just crawl. It's just too hard to hang onto your board, which is really insane. I mean, that may sound just, it's crazy surfers, but this is extreme even for surfers.
There are I think you mentioned there are 3 distinct areas at Ocean Beach that have very different personalities?
Well, sort of every block. There are like 30 blocks, and every block's got a name. You know, the spot is named after the block, and the sandbars are changing all the time. And there's an infamous inside bar you might be referring to. Like it's only part way out, and where it breaks really, really hard sometimes, and you can kind of get trapped there and think you're going to die, and then you sort of escape, and you just wish you successfully, but you wish you'd been driven back to shore and could go home and, you know, climb in bed and cry. And instead you're out. Oh, you know, I wish I hadn't made it out. It's a really intense place. I mean, it's fun, but it's frustrating. And I was really happy actually to move to New York. My wife said, or then girlfriend said, I'm so glad we're getting out of here. I was sure you're going to drown out there, because at least once a winter I'd come with just like clinical shock, come home just, and she said, but everybody, I mean, nobody ever really did drown, but everybody seemed to have these experiences, including me.
I don't know about the rest of you, but this is certainly not inspiring me to try surfing. Bill, when we talked on the phone the other day, you mentioned that you're going to be giving the commencement speech at UC Santa Cruz. Congratulations, first of all.
Thanks. Just one of the colleges, yeah.
I wanted to see if you could give us a sneak preview of what you're going to be telling these newly minted grads.
Don't surf. I have not, I've been trying to think of what to say. I'm sort of obsessed, like a lot of other people these days, with the Trump thing. And I don't think I should talk about that, but I'm not sure. I've never even been to a commencement, let alone spoken at one. So I really don't know yet. Yeah.
Right. Let's take some audience questions.
Is there a mic, maybe?
I understand the acoustics in this room are so good that a mic's not necessary. I don't know why we have one. But yes, let's start with you. I'll just repeat the questions in case you didn't hear it. Where do women fit in the surfing world?
I would say that in general these days, women are coming on very strong. Lots of girls are starting, and there's a women's pro tour where these top women are surfing sort of better and better, and yet I've actually never surfed with a really good woman surfer. I know a couple. I actually shared a stage with the women's world champion recently in Hawaii, Carissa Moore, but I've never been in the water with her. And I'm kind of, so they're a small minority is the short answer, but sort of growing. And I'm really interested to surf with. I've surfed a little bit with kind of ordinary to mediocre surfers who are women, but not with a really because in the lineup, if it's reasonably good, surf is usually sort of crowded, and there's lots of very primitive kind of dominant submission dance going on among the guys in the water, like who's faster, who's stronger, who's more aggressive, it's really primitive, and how well you surf and all that. But it's quite complicated, the sort of social contract that's out there, and sometimes it breaks down and people fight. But I mean, in general, it's just this ape dance, and when I see before I did this thing with Carissa, I looked at some video of her. I'd seen lots of video of her. I already knew everything about her surfing, but I always wanted to look at. And I watched her surfing at a really crowded day at this place Haleiwa in Hawaii, and she was absolutely ripping. She was definitely the best person. There's 40 good surfers in the water, and she's definitely the best surfer out there. And so she's getting the most waves, and she's making lots of proud macho guys put their tail between their legs and get out of her way. I mean, that's the only way it could be happening. And she's scaring people because she's surfing so hard, and her fins are loose half the time, and you don't know what she's going to do, but she's in control. And I'm sort of dying to experience this thing because I've had a lifetime of basically all men doing that, and so that's kind of coming. And but it's basically still a kind of boys' world mostly, and the surf, except in some places, it's like there are places where the girl culture is really strong. On Maui, for instance, there are parts of Maui where there's like a lot of really good young women who surf, and that there it's changing. But most places that I go, it's certainly like the surf magazines, which is where I see what's going on with kids who surf. I mean, I surf with middle-aged guys mainly in New York. And it's still really, really, heavy on the string bikinis and stuff. So.
Yes.
Yeah. Not so much a question, Bill, it's just to say that your talk, maybe with the help of your questioning there, John, it really resonated with us. My wife and I grew up in South Africa. We moved to Australia. We moved to California. and back to Australia, and now we live in Australia. So all this surfing is, and we have now 8 grandchildren. And believe it or not, they all surf as well.
Wow.
And I'm definitely going to buy your book, whether it's Christmas present or next week's present. I'm going to buy it and give it to them. And we've just sort of grown up in this kind of surfing culture, surfing well. So I'm just saying to you that I loved your presentation, and it's fantastic. And I love surfing and living in those parts of the world. It's available. It's lucky. It's privilege, but it's just great.
Thanks. I hope people could hear that. Just a sort of testimony to surfing. All right.
That also gives me a moment to put in the product placement that Bill will be signing, have a book signing at tent number 3, which is at Milvia and Center after the presentation. So please don't rush the stage for him.
Maybe out of time, but otherwise I will definitely.
Let's take a question from the back. Yes. Yeah, ma'am.
I've been surfing for a couple months now. I've been going places like Ocean Beach and Lindenmar and Santa Cruz. And I've seen there's people all over the spectrum, like people that say screamo when they come up, and like people doing yoga on the beach and like little jogs. It's like people surfing in Hawaii, were they all like the same vibe, or is it just like people all over the place?
I heard most of your comment, but not the final question.
His question was whether the vibes of surf community are consistent across the world or has it changed? Correct.
Is that right? Yeah. That's whether the vibe of a surf community is sort of different place to place or whether it changes. And the answer is it changes a lot. Yeah. You mentioned Ocean Beach and Lindenmar and Santa Cruz. I went to college in Santa Cruz and surfed there for a few years. And it varies a great deal. I mean, I've been really surprised to move to the East Coast. I had kind of a West Coast attitude toward the East Coast as being, not a place for serious surfing, and waves aren't that good, et cetera. But turned out to be wrong about that. And of course, some of the best surfers in the world, including the single best surfer in the world, Kelly Slater, come from the East Coast. So that's kind of given the lie to the old idea that, West is best or something. Anyway, but it's strange, like around New York, which is not the mellowest town you could ever live in, surfers are incredibly pleasant and mellow. And you show up there. I mean, most of the spots I surf are little towns along the south shore of Long Island or the north part of the Jersey Shore. I live in Manhattan. And so you're at somebody's local spot and you show up, they don't know you. And they could be, resentful and standoffish or worse, as they are at a lot of places, if you show up and they don't know you. And it's crowded. But they're not. They're the opposite. They're so, welcoming and noisy. It's actually embarrassing. And I find myself, being this kind of supercilious California guy saying, why are you hooting for that? That was nothing. But they kind of hoot for each other, and it's all very bro-y and pat on the back. And that's New York, strangely. And California varies very much from place to place. And some of the most beautiful places, I don't want to say too much about Big Sur, but I mean, people are just the worst. And other places that seem relatively grim and kind of urbanized and even ganged up, places perhaps around LA, people are actually quite nice. And the same true in Hawaii. There's a section of Oahu that is infamous, and people are afraid to surf there or go there if they don't live there. And I go there every year. My sister lives near there, and surf, and it's like people are happy to see. I mean, if you're respectful, obviously, and don't get in everybody's way, it's like they're happy to see a stranger because everybody's so afraid to surf there they never see anybody except their neighbors. So it's very different place to place. West Side.
Yes. Yes. And you were one of the surfers, right?
Yeah, well, I just wanted him to know I was so blown away by the article you wrote about big wave surfing at Ocean Beach. And like, I was compelled to print up copies and distribute them to all of my friends because he got it, you know. But and I don't even do that. That's just too big now. I had a bad hold down right after my son was born. I was like, enough.
Ah,
You described Ocean Beach very well.
thanks. Thanks.
And I think the locals are very friendly there too, which is also counterintuitive. I was just interested in the transcendence part. I think you're such an amazing writer. Thank you for that. And I think you do such an amazing job of, it's very difficult to write about the transcendent experience of surfing. And I guess I don't know if you could share a particular wave that maybe looms very large in your imagination, maybe perhaps many years later, many decades later, and we'll just touch on the transcendence.
Yeah, it's with me often. I mean, it's not usually like one ride. I mean, sometimes they're like peak rides that you will never forget. Although they always seem to, for memory purposes, they need for me some kind of triangulation usually. Like if I'm surfing alone, like no friend out or maybe nobody else out, that's unusual, but it happens. And I often can't remember any of my waves, or it's like there's nothing to bounce off to anybody to remember it with. And a lot of the rides you most remember, you're on some great wave and you see your friend paddling over the shoulder, that. And it's that moment that kind of locks the thing, and it's strange that way. But that's just, those are all moments in individual rides. It's more by the end of a great session, and for me often this is like surfing late in the day. So you surf up to sun goes down and up to the edge of darkness, and you come in with really. Cold water can help you. You come in incredibly tired and just all's right with the world in a way that you can't seem to get to any other way. I feel anyway just really quiet and really thankful. I mean, the way one should try to be more, but it just comes to you. And often when waves are great. I will find myself sort of dawdling on the shoulder, looking into them because they're so beautiful. If you're busy surfing, you're acting, reacting. If you're, to just really contemplate the thing is almost a deeper experience for me, and because you don't have the struggle to surf well. And in fact, I had a weird thing the other day. This is not really an answer to your question, but we were trying to make a podcast in Hawaii. About something, I don't know what it was, but it was connected to this book. And these producers sort of wired me up and said, now, talk as you're surfing. And I said, I had a rash guard and it was a little mic here. And so I paddle out and the surf was small. It was this place I used to surf as a kid off Diamond Head in Honolulu. And they say, talk, tell us what's going on out there. There are other people around. I can't start talking to myself. Here comes a wave, there goes a boat. I mean, what? And so they were really frustrated with me. And finally they said, okay, well, you're riding waves. So I couldn't get any waves. They're like the longboarders stealing all the waves. It was hard to get waves. And I'd get a couple, and I'd completely forget. I'd ride, and I'd pull out, and then they'd say, you didn't say anything. Okay. And so I stayed out kind of late at the end of the day, and a nice last wave came. It was offshores. It started kicking up kind of heavy off the east side of Diamond Head, and it was nice walled up wave, sort of biggest, best wave that had come. And so I got it and thought, okay, narrate. And as I was catching it, I said, oh, nice. And then all through the ride, I just kept saying, oh, nice. And each little thing. And finally at the end, I stick the last maneuver, nice. And I stick it. And they say, we got 9 nices, not another thing. And it was revealing about one's state of mind in a way. I thought, yeah, I was, like, how do you think about it? The narrative of the way? It was kind of like moment to moment, and that rail didn't bog, and this went okay, and the wave got better, and I only had one word, it seems, at my command. I write for a living.
It could have been worse, the word that you chose.
Yes.
There's been a lot of talk about sort of the spiritual aspects of surfing, and earlier you mentioned Kelly Slater. Do you have any interest in surfing the artificial wave?
I do. What this is, Kelly Slater, this 11-time world champion, just pulled back the curtain on a thing he's been developing for many years out in the Central Valley near Bakersfield, I'm told, an artificial wave pool. I mean, there are these artificial wave pools, these really kind of crummy simulacra of waves all over the place, but they've never really caught on because the wave isn't very good. Well, Slater's wave is really, really, really good. It's a quantum, many quantum leaps from everything that's ever been made artificially, this thing he's just revealed. And it's this beautiful, incredible machine made, but just, flawless wave. And of course he makes it look incredible, but it's not open to the public, but he's had a few friends, other pro surfers come, and they make it look pretty incredible too. And so there's one part of the sort of surfing nervous system that says, I gotta have it, I gotta ride that wave, let me at it. And then there's everything else. And it's, it's quite the existential question right now in a way in surfing, because they're gonna be able to replicate this thing, presumably it's just a machine, all over the world. And people are gonna be able to surf, exciting waves, not just junk, everywhere, anywhere that they can afford these things. And what is it? And the weird thing is that Slater, for instance, is such a great surfer, and what you get when you watch him surf is, and this is surfers and even non-surfers. I remember my daughter was about 2 or 3, and as usual, kind of on my knee watching surf videos. Like, what are we looking at, Daddy? And we were just watching a video, and he came on among the other people surfing, and she just suddenly, her eye went to it, and she says, "Oh, he's that word again. He's so nice. He's so nice. Why is he so nice?" And I'd say, because he's the best surfer in the world. That's why. Anyway. When you see Slater, for instance, do some incredible thing in incredible ways, what often you're responding to is, how did he know that? He has amazing athletic ability, but it's what he knows about what the ocean is going to do and how he might react sort of creatively, aggressively, progressively, just like magically. His sense of the ocean is so deep. And that's true of the few most exciting surfers in the world. There's a guy in Hawaii named John Florence. Same thing. Right now, he's younger. You just watch him, and how did he know? It's impossible from where he was to understand what that wave was going to do. I can't tell looking at it and how he's in it. But this machine wave has none of that. You ordered it up. You dialed it in. It's just going to do what it does in this tank with a flat bottom. And so there's some way in which it's theologically dead. I mean, it's just not, the ocean's not surfing. And Slater wouldn't argue that it is. But it's quite a challenge, this is what you always wanted. But it's not the thing at all. So it's this real kind of conundrum. Actually, I'm hoping to interview him about that, get him to talk about this and other things. I'd like to, he's a smart guy. And he's been working on this in secret. I mean, the engineers and that he hired to do this and who finally figured it out. So here, most people probably haven't seen this, but it is mesmerizing, especially for surfers, because it just goes and goes. And 30-second tubes, just unheard of. I don't want to call it perfection. That's a overused and misused word, but just, mechanical regularity, let us say.
Did he ever explain why Bakersfield?
I think land was cheap. Nobody was, Okay. Okay. What do you think? Is land cheap? What's the deal out there?
With sea level rise in a few years, they'll be surfing down there anyway.
There was already something there to build on. Yeah, that was it. Also, it seemed like when it was revealed to the surfing world, which tends to be on the coasts everywhere, it was it's impossible. Like it was like what was the place in with the Manhattan Project in New Mexico? I mean, like deep in the wilds of inland, a hidden project.
So this is why the Central Valley wants all our water. Another question? Yes.
Your two 1992 articles for the New Yorker about Ocean Beach, absolutely brilliant study of a subculture, one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read. But it benefited by having a central character whose name I recall was Dr. Mark Reneker.
Yes.
I wonder, he was a fascinating character, ER doctor at UCSF, as I recall. Whatever happened to Reneker?
I think
He's still surfing big waves, although he's like as old as me, and but not so much Ocean Beach. I haven't surfed with him in ages, but I see him every now and then, and he's got stories of huge surf up the North Coast, and he's a sort of brilliant guy with a whole career as a cancer education specialist that's quite big in books, and he's one of these people who's managed to combine surfing with a career, and often a challenge, but he's but as I say, not so much Ocean Beach anymore. He still lives at Ocean Beach, but he says he's off to, over the horizon somewhere in the north. And he does expeditions, I know, to Iceland and Greenland and the Antarctic, and he likes to surf Alaska. He's a cold water guy. So
We have time for one more question. Yes, please. You've been waiting patiently.
Managed to get to an awful lot of the places you talk about in the book, and many, many trips to South Africa. But the one thing that I found humbling were your descriptions of your surfing in Portugal. Have you dialed things back a bit in your advanced years?
yes, I have.
Everybody hear that question? It's about surfing in Portugal and asking whether Bill is dialed back.
This fellow surfed a
in
lot
its
of the
youth.
places. There's a kind of a world tour in the book, a lot of waves in different parts of the world, and he's been to a lot of those places. And there's the next to last chapter is about Madeira, this Portuguese island that I went to for 8 or 9 winters in the 90s. When it was sort of little known and then it was becoming better known. But it's a big wave spot because it's a little island sits out in the middle of the Atlantic with no continental shelf and just right in the storm path. I mean, storms hopefully don't come all the way, but they kick huge surf there. And I had a kind of, this middle-aged sort of renaissance of, I got a big wave board and was doing some stupid things there. And it was... and then I think at the end of that chapter, my daughter is born, and I'd say, that's it. I'm not going to do this anymore. And so, no, I don't, I've dialed it back, and I don't go there. And in fact, I snapped my gun in March at Laniakea. And the mature thing to do is not to replace it. The gun is a big wave board. But Madeira is amazing. They messed up some of the great waves with sea walls and stuff. So that would help me break the habit.
Well, please join me in thanking Bill Finnegan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.